I walked into that ballroom already knowing we weren't welcome. The place was dripping with gold, crystal lights, and people who believed their names carried more weight than their actions. Alara held my hand tightly as we stepped inside, both of us dressed well, both pretending this night wouldn't cut deeper than the others. My father's retirement gala, his night, his legacy, his chance to parade the children he felt were worthy. And I already knew I wasn't one of them. The hostess didn't even look up when she pointed us toward the very back. "Table 19, she said, almost apologizing. And when we got there, I realized why. It was the table for people who didn't matter. Teachers, assistants, people who worked hard but never got the spotlight. People like me. They smiled kindly, but I felt the sting. My own father had put me in the shadows. Across the room, Briar and Sloane were glowing under the soft lights, surrounded by people eager to flatter them. They looked like the real heirs, sharp suits, perfect smiles, confident in their power. My father stood with them, laughing loudly, telling stories about leadership, influence, and the future of the Vance legacy. Not once did he mention my name. When he finally stepped up to the stage to give his grand speech, the whole room fell silent. He soaked in the attention like it was oxygen. "Tonight," he said, raising his glass, "I honor the children who made me proud, the ones who showed ambition, the ones who built something." People clapped before he even finished. Then he looked straight at me, paused, and added, "And if you didn't, well, you can leave." The applause died. Chairs squeaked. Even the lights felt too bright. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I sat there at table 19, a full room watching me, waiting to see if I'd stand up and walk out like he wanted. Alara leaned slightly closer, her voice low and steady, telling me not to move, not to react. I didn't know why she was so calm. I didn't know she was already working on something far bigger than this moment. I looked at my father, the man who always measured worth in dollars and titles. To him, teaching was a failure. To him, my wife and I were an inconvenience. I felt the humiliation burn in my chest, but beneath it was something stronger, a certainty that I wasn't alone. Alara's hand on mine reminded me of that. Table 19 stayed silent. Nobody asked me to leave. Nobody pitied me. They just waited, giving me quiet support I hadn't expected. And for the first time in my life, their presence meant more to me than my father's name ever had. I didn't know it then, but that moment, the one meant to shame me, was the beginning of his downfall. Because while he was busy celebrating his empire, Alara was preparing to expose the truth that would bring it crashing down. And when she moved, she wouldn't just defend me. She would make sure everyone who ever underestimated people like us remembered exactly why they should have looked closer. When my father first built the Vance Education Trust, he told me I would have a place there someday. Not because I was his son, but because I cared about schools and understood what teachers faced every day. He said he wanted someone with real classroom experience to balance the corporate voices. For years, I believed him. I worked on proposals in my free time, giving him ideas that could help students and teachers. He always said soon, but soon never came. At the gala, I finally understood why. As the room settled after his speech, the lights shifted toward the stage again. Sloane walked up with a tight smile, standing beside my father as if she had already been waiting for her crown. He placed a hand on her shoulder and announced her as the new successor of the trust. People clapped, and she launched into a presentation that sounded like it belonged in a boardroom, not a school. She talked about cutting programs that weren't profitable, replacing experienced teachers with more flexible staff, and turning classrooms into growth environments. None of it had anything to do with learning. None of it reflected the ideas I had shared with him. It was clear he had taken my work, stripped out everything human, and handed the shell to her. I felt something twist inside me, not surprise, but recognition. This wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. My father had never planned to honor his promise. He only used my ideas when they benefited him, and he never intended to let someone like me, a teacher, have any real influence. I glanced at Alara, expecting her to look upset, but she wasn't. She sat straight, quiet, her expression unreadable. Every so often, her phone lit up, and her fingers moved quickly. She whispered, "Don't say anything yet." Her voice was calm, almost steady enough to cool the anger rising in my chest. I didn't understand why she was so composed. Watching Sloane talk about shutting down initiatives I spent years trying to build felt like someone was erasing the part of me that believed education could be better. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to call out the lies. But Alara's hand touched my wrist lightly, grounding me. "Wait," she said again, her eyes on her phone. That was when I noticed she wasn't scrolling. She was writing, responding, coordinating. I leaned slightly closer and asked who she was talking to. She didn't look up when she answered, "Dr. Patel." That made me pause. Dr. Aris Patel wasn't just any board member. He was the only one who ever showed real concern for teachers. If she was contacting him in the middle of this announcement, something serious was happening. Something bigger than my father's show. The rest of Sloane's speech passed in a blur. I heard applause, saw handshakes, and watched cameras flash, but every time I felt frustration rising, I remembered Alara's quiet instructions. She wasn't telling me to stay silent out of fear. She was telling me to wait because she knew timing mattered. My father thought he was presenting his perfect legacy. Sloane thought she was taking her place as the future of the trust. Neither of them saw what Alara was setting in motion. Something precise, something planned, and something that would make this moment look small compared to what was coming next. Alara didn't say anything right away after Sloane's speech ended. She waited until the room shifted into small conversations and people started walking toward the bar. Then she leaned slightly closer and spoke so quietly I almost missed it. "There's something you need to know," she said. Her tone wasn't angry or emotional. It was focused, like she had been waiting for the right second. I turned toward her, confused, and she continued, "I've been looking into the trust's contracts for months." That caught me off guard. I hadn't expected her to dig into anything related to my father. She usually stayed away from his world because he never treated her with respect. But as she kept talking, I realized she wasn't doing this for him. She was doing it for me. She told me she had gone through every major agreement the trust had signed. Some were clean, some were questionable, but one stood out: the sponsorship deal with the Laminatech Foundation. It wasn't just a simple funding partnership. It was the deal that allowed my father to expand the trust's programs and increase his national reach. Without it, half of his projects wouldn't exist. But what mattered most wasn't the money. It was a rule buried deep in the contract. Clause 7.3. Alara said it slowly, making sure I heard every detail. "The trust must always have one active educator on the board," she explained. "And any change in leadership needs written approval from the sponsoring foundation." I blinked, taking that in. My father had never mentioned anything like that. In all his speeches about legacy and power, he never once spoke about needing approval from anyone. He acted like his decisions were absolute. Alara looked at me with a steady gaze. "Clause 7.3 isn't optional. It was a condition your father agreed to because the foundation wanted someone who understands real classrooms involved in every decision. They didn't trust a board full of executives." A strange feeling ran through me, half disbelief, half something like hope. "But he appointed Sloane," I said quietly. "That's the problem," she answered. "He signed the contract, accepted their funds, and then ignored the rules he agreed to. Sloane isn't an educator, and he didn't get approval for the change. That's a breach." I sat back, letting her words settle. If what she was saying was true, this wasn't just a mistake. It was a violation that could cost him everything. And the best part, he couldn't twist it or argue his way out of it. He had signed the contract himself. I asked how she even found all this, and she told me she had a contact who helped her access public filings and cross-check details. But the deeper research, the parts other people missed, she did on her own. She showed me a screenshot saved on her phone, the clause circled clearly. It wasn't hidden. It was simply ignored by someone who thought he was untouchable. Then she said something that made everything click. "Dr. Patel knows," she whispered. "And he's ready." My heartbeat picked up. I realized Alara wasn't just uncovering information. She was preparing for a move that would expose the truth in front of everyone. My father believed he controlled the night. He believed he could change successors without consequences. But he never imagined someone would study the contract closer than he did. Alara wasn't just my wife in that moment. She was the quiet force building the trap he had already stepped into. The moment the applause swelled around my father and Sloane, the entire ballroom felt like it belonged to them. Cameras flashed, guests rose to their feet, and both of them stood there smiling as if the night had been scripted to celebrate their power. My father lifted Sloane's hand like he was presenting the future he always wanted. I sat still, watching it all, feeling the room move around me like a tide I was no longer part of. Then Alara pushed her chair back. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She stood with a quiet certainty that instantly caught my eye. I felt a small jolt of worry, but she gave me a quick glance, steady, sure, almost reassuring. Before I could ask her what she was doing, she had already started walking toward the stage. The crowd didn't notice her at first. Everyone was focused on my father and Sloane. But once she reached the steps leading to the podium, people began turning one by one, whispering to each other. My father spotted her approaching and frowned, confused and annoyed, as if she had interrupted a perfect scene. Alara gently lifted the microphone, her calmness cutting through the noise. "Good evening," she said, her voice clear. "I'm here on behalf of the Laminatech Foundation." The room shifted instantly. Conversations stopped. Applause faded. Cameras refocused. My father stared at her like she had spoken a foreign language. "This is not the time," he muttered, irritation slipping into his tone. Sloane stepped back, unsure of what was happening. Alara continued as if neither of them existed. "I need to address a matter regarding the trust's contractual obligations," she said. "Specifically the terms your organization agreed to when accepting Laminatech as partnership." A few guests exchanged confused looks. Others leaned forward, sensing something important. My father forced a smile. "This is unnecessary," he tried to say, but Alara spoke over him, politely, professionally, but firmly. "The trust's leadership has been changed without required approval," she said. "And the board no longer includes an active educator, which violates Clause 7.3 of the sponsorship agreement." A wave of shock rolled through the room. People who had been clapping moments earlier now stared, stunned. My father's face tightened. "Who do you think you are to question?" Before he could finish, Dr. Patel rose from his seat near the front. He walked toward the stage with measured steps, carrying a small remote in his hand. Without a word, he pressed a button, and the massive screen behind the podium lit up. The contract appeared in full view, large, unmistakable. Clause 7.3 was highlighted in bold. Gasps erupted around the room. The violation was clear as day. Dr. Patel spoke into his microphone. "The Foundation was not informed of any leadership changes," he said, "and an educator has been removed from the board without approval. This constitutes a breach." My father's voice cracked as he argued. "This is a misunderstanding." But no one believed him. Not with the proof right behind him. Sloane stepped away from the podium, her confidence melting into fear. The guests who had praised them minutes ago now whispered urgently, some shaking their heads. Alara remained steady. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look angry. She simply presented facts, facts that tore apart the image my father spent his life building. The ballroom filled with confusion, disbelief, and rising panic. What had started as a flawless celebration was now something else entirely. A moment where truth pushed through the polished surface, and everyone finally saw the cracks my father had tried to hide. And Alara was the one who pulled the curtain back. The moment the contract appeared on the screen, my father's calm mask cracked. His voice, usually smooth and commanding, turned sharp as he glared at Alara. "Who gave you the right to stand here?" he snapped. "Who are you to challenge my decisions in front of my guests?" Alara didn't flinch. She didn't step back or lower her gaze. She simply looked at him with the same steady expression she had worn the entire evening. The room fell silent again, everyone waiting for her response. You want to know who I am? She said softly, but her voice carried across the ballroom. Then I'll tell you. People leaned in, sensing something unexpected. I'm not here as a simple representative, she continued. I'm here as the founder and CEO of the Leminitech Foundation. The silence snapped into a wave of murmurs. Several people gasped. Sloan turned pale. My father froze completely, as if he didn't understand what he just heard. Alara didn't pause. Yes, she said. I'm the one who built the foundation. I kept my identity private because I wanted the focus to stay on the people we supported, not on me. Her tone stayed calm, but her words hit like a hammer. And I chose to fund the trust because of one proposal, Dax's proposal, about giving real teachers a voice in educational policy. I felt the air shift. People looked at me with a different expression now, some surprised, some thoughtful. My father looked like he had been struck. He had always believed he understood the source of his funding. Now he was realizing the truth had been sitting next to me the whole time. Alara continued, her voice gentle but firm. Every idea I supported came from the belief that students deserve leaders who understand classrooms. Dax brought those ideas forward. He worked on them with honesty and a real desire to create change. I read everything he created. That is why Leminitech approved the partnership. Then she turned slightly towards Sloan, who stood stiffly, her hands trembling. And while Dax was working quietly, Sloan was taking his ideas, removing anything meaningful, and presenting them as if they were hers. She didn't say the word plagiarism, but she didn't need to. The entire room understood. My father opened his mouth, but no words came out. His confusion mixed with disbelief, and then anger returned, stronger than before. You expect me to believe this? He said, trying to regain control. You expect me to accept that you built something of that scale? Alara met his stare without a hint of fear. I don't need you to accept it, she replied. It's already real. The guests watched silently, taking in every word. Many of them had assumed the foundation was run by some distant executive or investor. None of them had imagined it was the woman my father overlooked every time she entered a room. Alara finished with a calmness that made her words even sharper. You signed a contract with my organization. You agreed to rules you chose to ignore. You removed the one educator whose work inspired the funding in the first place. You broke the agreement. And now you must face the results. In that moment, everything shifted. Alara was no longer the quiet outsider my father dismissed. She was the person who held the power he thought he controlled. The guests saw it. Sloan saw it. And most importantly, my father finally understood it. He had underestimated the one person who understood both the system he built and the weaknesses he tried to hide. The moment Alara revealed who she truly was, the room felt different. People who had been cheering minutes earlier now stood completely still, waiting for what would happen next. My father tried to recover his confidence, but it was clear he didn't know what to say. He had always believed he controlled the trust, the money, the reputation, everything. Now he was face to face with the one person who had the authority to end it all. Alara lifted the microphone again, her voice steady enough to silence every whisper. Since the trust has violated the terms of its agreement, she said, Leminitech is ending its sponsorship immediately. The words dropped like a stone. There was no build-up, no hesitation. Just a clear decision spoken in front of hundreds of witnesses. For a second, no one reacted. It was as if the room didn't fully understand what she had said. Then the reality hit. $6 million. That sponsorship wasn't just financial support. It was the backbone of the trust. It funded programs, partnerships, and the expansion my father bragged about constantly. Without it, everything he had built would start collapsing piece by piece. My father's face turned a shade of red I had never seen. You cannot do that, he shouted, his voice cracking. This is my event. My organization. Alara didn't even look shaken. You agreed to the terms. You broke them. This is the consequence. Dr. Patel stepped beside her, confirming every word. The termination is effective immediately, he said, projecting the official notice onto the large screen. It was signed, time-stamped, and impossible to argue with. Gasps echoed around the room. A few people stepped away from my father's table, not wanting to be connected to a collapsing empire. Others pulled out their phones, recording everything. Some were already typing, probably sending the news to colleagues or posting online. And the cameras, those live-streaming cameras my father arranged to show off his legacy, caught every second. My father tried to grab the microphone, but a staff member stepped in front of him, blocking the gesture. Sloane looked completely frozen, her confidence gone. She stared at the screen as though her future was being erased in front of her eyes. Someone whispered near me, "This is going viral in minutes." They were right. A scandal this public, this sudden, and this dramatic was going to explode everywhere. News sites, social media, blogs, education forums. People would replay this moment again and again. My father's carefully polished reputation, the one he protected more fiercely than his own relationships, was falling apart in real time. Every lie, every arrogant decision, every fake achievement he pushed forward was now overshadowed by the truth. He had ignored the rules, stolen credit, and treated people like they didn't matter. Alara didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply stepped back, letting the facts speak for themselves. She had done what needed to be done, and she had done it with precision. The ballroom filled with murmurs, shock, and a sense of disbelief. Guests who once admired my father now avoided his eyes. Some shook their heads. Others whispered that they always suspected something was off. The crowd shifted away from him, as if his downfall were contagious. I watched the man who once believed he controlled every outcome now standing alone, stiff, and unable to stop the collapse. The trust he had used to elevate himself was now dissolving under the weight of his own choices. And all of it, every second, was happening in front of the world. That was the night the Vance scandal began. The night the empire cracked open and showed what was hiding underneath. The night my father finally learned that arrogance doesn't protect anyone, not even him. The days after the gala felt unreal. What had happened on that stage spread faster than anyone expected. Clips of the confrontation appeared everywhere, shared, reposted, analyzed. Within hours, the story had become a headline. Within days, it turned into a national discussion. And my father, who loved attention when it made him look powerful, now hated every second of it. The Trusts Board reacted quickly. They couldn't ignore the contract violations or the public embarrassment. Meetings were held behind closed doors, and statements were released one after another. The pressure grew until there was only one option left. My father had to step down. They called it early retirement, but everyone knew it wasn't a choice. It was the only way to stop the organization from sinking even deeper. For a man who lived for control, losing his position was devastating. He stopped making public appearances. He avoided reporters. Even the few allies he once relied on kept their distance, afraid of being connected to the scandal. His polished image was gone, replaced by suspicion and disappointment. At home, his life fell apart just as fast. Briar packed her things within a week. She didn't make a dramatic exit. No screaming, no fighting. She simply left, taking whatever she felt entitled to. She didn't want to stay with someone whose influence had faded. She had always cared more about status than love, and once the spotlight moved away from him, she didn't see any reason to stay. Her departure hit him harder than he admitted. Sloane didn't escape the fallout either. The plagiarism issue spread quickly. Schools, companies, and organizations she wanted to work with all backed away. Her credibility dropped overnight. She tried releasing statements claiming miscommunication and collaborative ideas, but nothing helped. The truth was too clear. Her name became tied to dishonesty, and doors that were once open to her now shut one after another. While their world shrank, mine changed in a different way. People began reaching out to me, teachers, community leaders, former students. They thanked me for ideas I had quietly worked on for years. They talked about how rare it was for someone in education to stand up for real classroom needs. Articles were written about the importance of giving teachers authority in policy discussions. For the first time, My work was being seen without my father's shadow blocking the view. Some reporters even called me the visionary my father ignored. But I didn't let the attention go to my head. I knew the praise wasn't just for me. It was for every teacher who worked tirelessly without recognition. Still, being acknowledged felt strange and meaningful at the same time. Alara stayed close by, watching everything unfold with calm understanding. She didn't brag about what she had done. She didn't try to claim the spotlight. She just kept supporting the projects we believed in, making sure the focus stayed on the future, not the chaos behind us. Seeing the difference in how people treated me compared to how they treated my father was eye-opening. He had spent decades building an image based on fear and authority. I had spent years building ideas based on experience and real needs. When the truth finally came out, only one of those foundations held strong. The fallout wasn't something I celebrated. It wasn't satisfying to watch my father struggle, but it was clear that the life he had built wasn't as solid as he believed. And as everything crumbled around him, something new began to take shape for me. A chance to build something honest, something grounded, something real. The world was changing, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a place in it. Dax and I didn't waste time once the chaos settled. The moment the funds returned to us, we agreed they shouldn't sit in an account or be used to make anyone look important. They were meant to help teachers. The people who stayed late bought supplies with their own money and still showed up with patience the next morning. That purpose had been buried under egos and power games, but now we finally had the freedom to put everything back where it belonged. We met with a small group of educators who had been pushed aside by the system. They were tired but hopeful, the kind of people who believed change could still happen if someone just opened the door for them. Instead of talking about titles or protocols, we sat with coffee and asked them what real support looked like. They told us stories of broken equipment, crowded classrooms, and creative ideas that were always dismissed because they didn't fit the image the board wanted. Dax listened quietly at first, taking notes, asking sharp questions, and showing them that their ideas mattered. For the first time, I saw him step into a role he should have held long ago. Someone with vision and empathy, not someone trying to impress a committee. We decided to call the new program the Vance Renewal Fund. It wasn't about honoring the family name, but reclaiming it. It was about creating something honest out of something that had been twisted. Every grant would go directly to teachers, not filtered through layers of administration. We made the process simple so educators didn't have to fight through endless paperwork. We wanted to give them space to breathe and create, not carry more weight. When we planned the first official meeting, we both knew exactly where it needed to happen. We booked the same ballroom, the same place where I had been pushed to the side and labeled as someone who didn't belong. Walking in again felt different. The room didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like we were rewriting what happened there. Before anyone arrived, Dax placed a small sign at one table in the back. It read, "Table 19 reserved." We didn't explain it to anyone. It wasn't for them. It was a reminder to ourselves of where everything started, a symbol of the moment we decided we weren't going to let disrespect define our future. It also reminded us of every person who had been overlooked and underestimated, just like we had been. As the teachers entered and found their seats, the room felt warmer than it ever had. Conversations were calm, genuine, and full of possibilities instead of pressure. Ideas flowed naturally. No one was trying to dominate the room or chase applause. For the first time, the focus was exactly where it should be, on the people who kept the education system alive every single day. Watching Dax lead that meeting, I felt a quiet pride. He had stepped out from under his father's shadow and built something meaningful with his own hands. And together, we had taken pain, humiliation, and betrayal and shaped them into something that would outlast every scandal attached to the Vance name. Silas reached out late in the evening, long after the house had gone quiet. Dax's phone lit up with his father's name, and he stared at it for a moment before answering. He knew this call would come eventually, but he also knew it wouldn't bring any comfort. Silas sounded tired, almost hollow. yet his tone carried the same sharp edge he had always used to keep others small. He didn't start with remorse. Instead, he spoke as if everything was part of a competition. He accused Dax of taking advantage of a moment of weakness, of turning the situation into some kind of personal victory. He threw out phrases that made it clear he wasn't calling to take responsibility. He was calling because he hated the idea of losing control. Even now, with his career shattered and his name swirling through the news, he still tried to twist the story, so he looked like the victim. Dax listened quietly, not interrupting. He had spent years hoping for a moment where his father would show genuine understanding, but that hope had faded long before this call. Hearing Silas talk now only confirmed what he already understood. His father didn't want to make things right. He wanted to rewrite the ending. When Silas finally paused, breathing hard as if he had been wrestling with the words, Dax spoke calmly. He didn't raise his voice or defend himself. He simply told the truth. He said he wasn't trying to win anything. He explained that stepping out of his father's shadow wasn't a victory. It was survival. "I didn't win," he said softly. "I just stopped losing." The line silenced Silas. For the first time in the entire call, he had no immediate reply. Dax used that pause to set the boundaries he should have set years earlier. He told his father that if he truly wanted to apologize, it would require more than a late-night call filled with blame. A real apology meant facing what he had done, not only to him, but to the teachers he had ignored, dismissed, and used for his own image. Dax told him that an honest step forward would involve therapy. Not a session or two to say he tried, but actual work to confront his behavior. He also made it clear that his father owed educators a public statement acknowledging the damage he caused. Not excuses. Not carefully shaped speeches. A simple and direct admission of truth. Silas didn't like hearing any of it. He grew defensive, insisting that the world misunderstood him, that people exaggerated the situation, that he had always acted with good intentions. But his voice lacked the force it once had. Every time he tried to regain control of the conversation, Dax stayed steady. He didn't argue. He didn't bend. He didn't soften the boundaries. When the call ended, Dax didn't feel relief or triumph. He felt a quiet certainty. He had spoken honestly, something he had avoided for years. Silas, however, remained trapped in the mindset that had destroyed everything he built. His apology had been empty, and Dax could finally see that clearly. Instead of carrying the weight of his father's disappointment, Dax let it fall away. He understood that some people apologize only because they fear consequences, not because they want to change. And he refused to let that pull him backward again. Dax stood at the same podium where he once felt invisible. The ballroom looked familiar, but everything about the moment felt completely different. The event was no longer centered on prestige or status. It now belonged to people who spent their lives guiding students, often without recognition. The energy in the room was calm but full of purpose, and every chair held someone who understood the true meaning of impact. As the audience settled, Dax took a breath and looked around. This place had once pushed him to the edges. Placing him at a table meant to remind him he didn't belong. Tonight, the atmosphere was warm, and every person met his eyes with respect, not judgment. His name wasn't being used as a prop. He wasn't being compared to anyone. He was simply being seen for what he had given: time, patience, and belief in young minds. Just before he began speaking, an envelope was slipped into his hand. The handwriting on the front was messy, the kind only a teenager could produce. He opened it quietly, expecting a simple thank you. Instead, he found words that made him pause. A former student wrote about how his class changed their entire path. They explained how his small acts, listening when others didn't, encouraging them to keep going, helping them find value in themselves, had inspired them to study education. They wrote that they wanted to be for others what he had been for them. Dax read the note twice, feeling something settle deep inside him. It wasn't pride. It wasn't validation. It was clarity. His father had spent years chasing influence through titles and donations, believing that power came from how high your name appeared on a board. But none of that built anything that lasted. It could crumble in a single night, and it had. What remained standing was the work that didn't make headlines. The quiet hours teachers gave, the lessons that shaped confidence, the guidance that carried students through hard years. His father's world was crafted for praise. Dax's world was made of people, and that difference had changed everything. Stepping forward, he began his speech. He talked about why the fund mattered, not as a symbol, but as a tool to lift those who rarely received support. He shared how this new chapter wasn't about correcting the past, but strengthening the future. He didn't mention Silas by name. He didn't need to. The room already understood the contrast between what had been valued before and what was being honored now. As he finished, he looked out at the group seated at the section they now called Table 19. Those teachers smiled back at him, knowing exactly why he kept that space in the room. It wasn't a reminder of humiliation. It was a reminder of direction. It showed where he had begun, not where he was meant to stay. The applause rose slowly at first, then filled the hall. Dax didn't absorb it as praise. He saw it as a sign that the shift he had fought for was finally real. His father's version of legacy had relied on fear and image. His own legacy didn't need a spotlight. It lived in handwritten notes, in changed lives, in a future that grew stronger with every student who found their voice. As he stepped away from the podium, a final thought came to him, steady and certain. He said, "You can leave." And I did. Then I came back with everyone they overlooked. Do you think I was right to walk away from my father's world, or should I have tried to fix things with him? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell.